Finally done filming for the Next Great Yugituber. Oh, jeez! 'Cause I'm having a good time, What's up, my Yugi Bros? I am the best dressed in the contest, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome back to the final round of the Next Great Yugituber. This contest has put me to the test as an entertainer by challenging me to do what others have done before me, but now, for the final video, I want to show you the core of what I do. This middle-of-the-roads philosophy that I call business casual Yu-Gi-Oh! Business casual Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the idea that even competitive players still play for fun, and even casual players still play to win. Possibly the most important key to both of these things is finding the competitive deck that you enjoy the most, something I call your ideal deck type. While there is something to be said for playing the deck that you consider to be the objective best deck of the format, we usually play better when we play decks we like than decks we don't. Sometimes players get in a rut and can't find a deck they like, but that's exactly why we're here today. So without further ado, let's get to work. Hit it. Your deck type is a small formula or kind of a personal ID that tells you what are the things you like the most in a deck. The way I do it, this formula is made up of 4 factors: your complexity, playstyle, win condition, and secondary strategy. Decks also have a similar formula. Builds and players vary, so it's not an exact science, but chances are if you find a deck whose formula matches your ideal deck type formula, it's probably going to be a deck you'll like playing. You've probably played some decks that you like better than others. Those decks are likely close to your ideal deck type, so as I talk through the 4 factors, keep them in mind and think about where your favorite decks fall. Complexity is basically how much your deck depends on combos. It's the question of if you don't open with combo pieces, how boned are you? Complexity exists on a sliding scale. On the low end are decks like Dino Rabbit, where individual cards make the plays. On the other end are decks like Mermail and Infernity, where the emergency procedure for not opening with combo pieces is curling up in fetal position and crying. Important side note here is that complexity really has little to do with skill or the difficulty of running a deck. On the one end, there are plenty of low complexity decks that take a lot of skill and thought to run, or you're totally sunk, and on the other end there are Lightsworns. I rest my case. A deck's playstyle is how it manages resources. It's also on a sliding scale. On the one end are decks like Dragon Rulers, which depend entirely on toolboxing the deck and or graveyard. On the other end are decks like Chainbeat, which focus on gaining the most utility out of the cards in their hand, or their visible resources. An easy measurement as to whether your deck is more utility or toolbox is the number of cards in your deck that either add or special summon from your deck or graveyard. Utility players usually like to outsmart their opponent, while toolbox players generally enjoy making creative plays. These are your Batman and Robin. The win condition is obviously the way your deck wins, and the secondary strategy sets up or supports the win condition. A deck's win condition and secondary strategy each fall under one of 3 categories: aggro, control, or stun. The aggro strategy is to win through fast damage and unbreakable boards. They rely on big monsters that are really tough to remove. The aggro strategy can't be bothered with silly things like reactive plays or removal. In fact, an aggro player will be quick to remind you that destroying a monster by battle is removal at a +1. Famous aggro decks include Chaos Dragons, Plant Synchro, Mermail, and Cliffwort. Control decks win by exhausting your opponent of resources. They do so by manipulating your opponent's field. These days, control decks mainly do so through removal, but control decks have also been known to manipulate stats, battle positions, and occasionally card effects. You know a control player because they're the weirdos who think the grind game is the best part. Famous control decks include Goat Control, Gladiator Beast, Fire Fist, and Spellbooks. Stun wins by locking the opponent out of the game. Unlike Control, Stun relies almost entirely on negation and floodgates. Stun players are those degenerate dickweeds grinning at you from across the table as you scream in frustration at trying to establish a board under 3 floodgate cards. Famous stun decks include Classic Anti-Meta, Little City, Dino Rabbit, and Evil Swarm. Interestingly, stun, control, and aggro often work in a kind of rock, paper, scissors type way, but that's a video for another time. I didn't include win conditions like Burn, Exodia, Final Countdown, or Empty Jar because so far these win conditions have only been used to make degenerate decks, and let's face it, if those are your ideal deck type, then maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not the game for you. Once you've decided what deck types you like best out of the 4 categories, you can make your formula. Personally, I like a high-complexity, big toolbox aggro deck with a control secondary strategy. After that comes finding a deck to match. The bad news is that given the ever-changing nature of the game we play, you won't always find a competitive deck that matches your ideal perfectly. The good news is that if you know which of these factors is the most important to you, then you can almost always find a close match in the competitive game that you will enjoy. And that's what I hope you come away from this video with. If you're not sure what the formula for a deck is, check out the samples linked in the description below. For more info on the subject, check out the original playlist on finding your ideal deck type. Thank you all for your support so far. This competition has helped me to improve my content and skill by leaps and bounds. I also want to thank all of my competitors for being so good that I was forced to step up my game. Hey, if you've seen my content and you think I deserve it, I would be honored if you would hit that thumbs up button to vote the RJB0 for the next great Yugituber. Meanwhile, thank you all for watching. I am the one, the only, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See ya. Frickin' delicious burger.